Cuckooing is a term that explains when a vulnerable person is targeted. Perpetrators come along, befriend this person with the purpose of wanting to take over their property, and then they want to use that property for illegal gain. So to be able to financially exploit the person and to be able to then use that as a base where they take illegal drugs and sometimes in worst case scenarios have a base for sex working.
Anybody could be at risk of being cuckooed. It could be an elderly, vulnerable person, normally people living on their own because they're easier to exploit. It could be a young person or a person with learning disabilities or somebody who's just generally vulnerable.
So the signs of cuckooing can be where somebody says that they haven't seen a person who lives in a particular property for a while. They haven't seen them leave the house, but they do keep seeing people coming and going that they don't know to that property. It can lead to antisocial behaviour. There could be vehicles coming and going from that property all times of day and night. There could be young people being brought to the property.
Cuckooing, sadly, affects the most vulnerable people in society and unfortunately benefits the most dangerous.
Back in September, we monitored 2 individuals that were accessing one of our high-rise blocks. Clearly didn't belong there. They were tower gating people into the block. They weren't using fobs or they weren't calling us for access. So we knew something wasn't right. We received a call from a tenant. He'd said that he hadn't seen his neighbour for a couple of days, that he was quite concerned. So that's not unusual for us to receive calls like that. So we would generally then place a welfare call to that resident and make sure they're okay. On this occasion, the tenant didn't answer his intercom. At that point, alarm bells were ringing. We sort of put 2 and 2 together and thought maybe that there's something going on at that address. So we've contacted the environmental protection officers and we've asked them to go and check the address for us.
My name is Rajesh Patel. I'm an environmental protection officer for Sandwell Council. On initial assessment, we visited the property and we was greeted by a woman in her 30s. Not what we was expecting because the gentleman's quite elderly, in his 70s. She's alleged that she was his carer in an unofficial capacity. We identified the house in a state of disarray and mess, and the smell coming from it suggested that drugs had been taken, something which was not typical of this gentleman. We then asked him to physically come to the doorway so we could actually see how he was. We was greeted by a very skinny, skeletal gentleman, emaciated, very, very frail looking, who then said he was fine, I'm okay, these people are looking after me, which then we realised there's another gentleman in there, again in his 30s. None of them were family and none of them were carers or anything in any official capacity. So which raised concerns because this gentleman just looked ill. It seemed that the person, the carer, who had a glazed look on her face anyway, that she wasn't telling the truth.
I was made aware of an email that was sent to me as part of an alert from my EPOs. They had concerns for an individual who was suspected of being exploited and identified it as a potential cuckooing and a serious danger to this individual. It was arranged for a social worker from the safeguarding team to then go and visit the property and to take the next steps to protect the gentleman.
We knocked on the door. He opened, he let us into the property. He was a bit reluctant maybe to engage. Then when we went into the property, I had to reassess the situation. He looks frail to me and I said, "Are you well? Do you need a doctor or can we call an ambulance?" Food-wise, there was nothing. There was a few, I think, Weetabix. He didn't have any money with him. I said, "You know what, I don't feel it's okay for you to remain here. I think you need help."
He was telling us that there was nothing wrong, but when we're observing the scene that we're met with, you could very much see that this was a man who had been exploited. He was emaciated himself, so he wasn't feeding himself properly. He suffered with emphysema, so he hadn't got the right medical care.
You could see that there was wraps and foil and certain drug paraphernalia in there.
He was able to show me bank statements where he was able to show me the big withdrawals that the exploiters were making from his bank account, and he was very much a prisoner in his own home.
And he just was sitting in the chair, really, really looking unwell, but was adamant that these people were his friends and they were sort of looking out for him and they weren't doing anything wrong, until we sort of explained to him that they were not your friends, and had they been your friends, you wouldn't be in this situation now.
Things could have only just got worse for him. He was already going downhill. It wouldn't have taken too much for him to go a bit further downhill. In cases such as Cuckooing, he could be put out onto the street without anybody knowing, and he'd be at serious risk of serious harm or possibly death.
We wanted him to move out, so he was safe for the next few days at least, and we didn't want them coming back into the block, back into his flat, taking it over again. So we explained to him that it would be a good idea for him to move out. He'd have a warm bed, he'd have some food. At first he was like, no, I don't want to go. He was quite a proud man, and he was embarrassed about coming out of the block and people seeing him.
At first, you'll often find that victims are reluctant to be made safe because they don't want to acknowledge what's going on, and that's part of a trauma response.
Then we start that conversation again with a lot of persuasion that, we are concerned, we care, you're not on your own, we are here to support you, because I can see a vulnerable adult who can't help himself. No, I can't accept help because I'm still able. I said, it's just for the weekend. I just want you out of here, a breather.
And we said we'd arrange transport to get him there, and he agreed in the end. The social worker packed a suitcase for him.
I started packing the toiletries and a few clothes, and I said, I'm going with you. So he sort of cheered up.
The first thing is to let him know that he matters, and quite often, I said to him, would you like a hug? That might sound very, very unprofessional, but that's probably the best thing he received that day, because he said yes. And so when I gave him that hug, when he got onto that transport, when he went to his new location, it was just a moment where he recognised that actually these people mean what they say, they care about me.
They have already prepared a bed and meal. He was welcome, and everyone sort of embraced him because he was so happy. It was just so good to see the side of him. I think he was a man who was bottling it up, crying for help, but not expressing it or verbalizing it.
He was quite emotional to be somewhere safe and somewhere that he could call his home for a short period of time, where he knew that he would be cared for and supported.
And he has since decided he doesn't want to return back to the flat, and he's going to stay there.
And hearing how he's getting on now is just phenomenal.
Just seeing someone in such a vulnerable state to being healthier, it makes you feel good, and you value your job, and you live for these times where you can actually genuinely help people.
We're just working together to help a vulnerable adult.
We have such good systems in place with Sandwell Council. We have such a robust response to these things that helps with the preparation. Knowing that there is somebody you can call, that we're all working together, and knowing that we're all on the same page. And that really matters.
The fact that we've managed to get this tenant into a place of safety within 24 hours of receiving that first call, I think is excellent and does make me very proud to work here.
I think this example is a prime example of Sandwell coming together, and it's just safeguarding. It's what we do, and it's how safeguarding should work. All teams coming together, alerts coming from everywhere. My EPOs are the eyes and ears on the ground. We need to make sure we get it into the right hands, the experts, the social workers, the safeguarding teams, and it just shows it's a one council, one team approach, but albeit seamless.
And I slept better that night knowing that he was safe, that person was safe. And when you get a good outcome like that, it does make you proud. It does make you proud doing your job, and you think, I've done a good day's work today.
We are Sandwell.
We are Sandwell.
We are Sandwell.
We are Sandwell.
We are Sandwell.